Federal agencies are on a constant journey to modernize their IT. Working with integrators steeped in managed service program delivery is one way to help agencies make faster headway with their most pressing IT infrastructure, hardware platform, software application, and security needs. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk a little more about that is Steve Wallace, Chief Technology Officer at DISA. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start by asking, what's an example of an IT, operational, or even a staffing challenge at DISA that DISA has faced, where adopting an as-a-service model has presented a faster or more effective way of delivering on your efforts?
Sure. So a great example was our adoption of what we call DoD 365, which was basically the Office 365 platform built for the DoD. It's allowed us to be a much more integrated force across the board. A number of capabilities that it brought to the platform. We had actually, interestingly enough, in 2011, the department moved, or parts of the department moved to our Defense Enterprise Email Platform, DEE. And we learned a lot from that move in terms of the Army moving as the first large customer over to that, and some of the cultural shift that came along with, basically giving up the box hugging, if you will, on-prem of these capabilities on-prem and moving towards more of that as a service model. In that case, we were the service provider. In the case now, and as we're seeing the greater adoption of a number of capabilities, we are now becoming the customer, but we're seeing a big uptick. DoD 365 is a great example, but there's a number of other capabilities we've adopted as well, and it's gone well to this point.
And kind of extending on that question, how are you using various degrees of managed services or as-a-service models to meet mission objectives? And in contrast, what are examples of what you're keeping in-house as in the balance of that?
Sure. So across the board, whether we are talking about software as a service or whether we're talking about going down the stack as for infrastructure as a service, I mentioned DoD 365. One of our other large adoptions was now a few years into its deployment was our cloud-based internet isolation. So that's got somewhere in the order of 2.7 million users on it right now across the department in various enclaves within the department, and we've seen actually a very positive impact of that service. A number of back office services. With respect to business processes and that sort of thing, we've made a lot of adoption there. In terms of keeping them, what we keep on-prem, a lot of that is frankly mission dependent. The department does have a lot of unique needs with respect to disconnected operations, that sort of thing. That's where, frankly, software as a service tends to struggle a little bit more because it's sort of that centralized, commoditized approach. So SaaS starts to have some struggles when we talk about disconnected ops. But as you move down the stack into infrastructure, it opens up a few more opportunities in terms of disconnected operations. The other side too is highly transactional applications don't always fit really well in that as a service model and need to remain on-prem. So it really depends. But the bottom line is the department is more open than ever to the adoption of these commercial platforms and how we use them to better the department.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you illustrate or quantify a little bit more the kind of impact that as-a-service models have had? Time savings, dollar savings, faster execution, those kind of things?
Sure. So I'll go back to our cloud-based internet isolation deployment. What we were seeing there is we were seeing a significant uptick in terms of throughput through our sensor suites at our edges. And the challenge is generally bandwidth is cheap. However, when you start talking about through sensors and devices, that sort of thing, bandwidth starts to get exponentially more expensive the higher that those bandwidth needs go. So CBII allowed us to adopt that software as a service model and give us insight into users' browsing behavior like we had never had previously, and a level of protection that we hadn't had previously. But we're seeing this a lot. Like, that's one example, but we're seeing it a lot in the commodity IT space. As I mentioned previously, when you get into sort of those edge cases, some of those disconnected operations or latent operations, it starts to have some struggles. But back in that commodity, where the department has its least number of special needs, and frankly, I think that's one of our challenges that we always have to balance is those special needs of the department. Sometimes they're absolutely there. Other times we have to step back and reassess, do we really need those special things, or can we just straight and more directly adopt commercial technologies? I think that's been something in the past that's sort of hindered us, and where the change in approach and the mentality of the department has gone as we adopt more and more commercial capabilities.
Appreciate that. And next, so what are some lessons that you've learned that you might share with others, particularly because not only are you doing this as an agency, but really as a broker for other customers? What would you share with them?
Sure, there's a few things. Things like SaaS and even IaaS, down through the stack through IaaS, don't mean completely hands off, right? It doesn't mean that you can just sit back and let the vendor do all the work and you're suddenly, you can move on to other things. Oftentimes a move to SaaS means you're still managing the tenant, you're still managing the configurations within. There's still a lot of, frankly, knobs and knobs to turn and switches to flip. It really just, as you look at that OSI model, it simply moves your focus further up the stack, away from a lot of those, those lower levels of that OSI model, and your concentration moves up, which means you can concentrate on those, more fully. You receive a lot of the benefit of that DevOps deployment model, where features and capabilities are constantly coming into the platform. But again, you can't take your eyes off of the fact that this is still your area of responsibility, and it just really kind of shifts that focus. Another place is balancing the talent and the skill levels, right? So as you're moving further up that stack, your talent and your workforce needs to evolve and sort of come with that. This is put forward an initiative we call Workforce 2025, and it's really to help the staff grow and evolve and get to that point where, as these capabilities really change and our needs within the capabilities change, we can evolve as a workforce. So those are the main, I'd say, lessons learned. Is you can't take your eye off the ball, and help your staff and the workforce evolve towards these new capabilities.
And that's a great point. I appreciate that, particularly about the skills part of the equation. And then lastly, so now that you've kind of, further up this learning curve and seeing those benefits, how does that shape, where you see your technology priorities going in the near and longer term future?
Sure. So we definitely see increased adoption of a lot of these capabilities, but again, having to balance the disconnected operations need that the department has. Frankly, this is the way that IT is evolving, right? So someone asked me not too long ago, as DEE was sort of going away and being replaced by DoD 365, was I upset with the fact that DEE was going away? And no, I wasn't. I was there at the beginning and had the privilege of working on that thing. But the reality is IT is evolving. It's not as the capabilities that were delivered on-prem just a decade ago can't evolve as quickly as those by these, by the managed providers. And we simply need to run towards it, and we need to adopt it and to go in eyes wide open that it's not always the panacea, but there are certainly a lot of benefits to the capabilities. So it's definitely shaping our approach in that respect. We're looking at all aspects of the places that we serve the department. And if it's happening better and more effectively out in the commercial world, we certainly want to look at that and be part of that, and work with a lot of the new and up and coming companies as they're evolving their offerings and how they can best support the department.
Well, Steve Wallace, thank you so much for joining us here, and also just sharing your insights about the impact and kind of how the role of managed services is kind of shaping the way you're working in the future towards supporting your all your constituents and DISA at large. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, I appreciate it, Wyatt.